With the exciting arrival of squash to the Olympics here in Los Angeles in 2028, it makes it all the more interesting to welcome on a lifer in squash, a wonderful advocate, and one who is very happy to see where the sport is going. Conor O'Malley, Senior Advisor, Business Development as well for Professional Squash Tour. He joins me. I'm Brian Fenley. We'll get into the most exciting development of the Olympics and squash coming together in 2028. Also look at where the sport has been and what it's going to take to spark even further interest in what it will look like the sport going into the future. Conor, thanks so much for joining me and being a part of this.
Thanks, Brian. I'm really glad to be here. I'm not used to being on this side of the mic. I'm used to asking the questions, and I often thought it's maybe just because I'm not a good guest. So we're going to find out today whether that comes true for me or not. But anyway, thank you for inviting me and reaching out, and for, like you said, this is a really meaningful and important time for the sport of squash, and I think we're all excited with the focus on LA 28 in a few years. So it's exciting times for sure.
I feel like you're going to make that transition extremely well in terms of going from asking the questions to answering the questions. I can already tell you're hard on yourself, but trust me, this will be a great conversation. In regards to seeing where squash is now, it seems like it has to be a long time coming to get this respectability worldwide, considering that the sport is played worldwide, multiple countries around the world, up to 200 million people are playing this sport. You've got 20 million people, 200 countries. There's just a lot going on here, if I get my numbers correct right there. What do you think was holding the sport back in years prior to now it's able to to have this traction that it didn't have before?
It's a great question, and I kind of jumped on the scene a little bit later compared to some of like other people who've been involved in the sport for a lot longer than me. Like really, I picked up the sport when I was 16 professionally. I got in around 2003, so I'm not privy to all of the dated history, and especially in England in the 70s and 80s hit this heyday. Same thing in America. This like zeitgeist of hardball was really strong here in America. So mine is a little bit, more modern history, so to speak, and working on three unsuccessful tours of campaigns trying to get in the sport kind of brought me a little bit closer to what was going on um, um, in regards of feedback from the IOC. Officiating was a problem. Broadcasting was a problem. At the time, we didn't have gender parity in terms of sport presentation. And we really took those notes to heart as a sport and really made huge strides sort of achieving that with the broadcast, Squash TV as kind of the core, not only the OTT platform, but we've taken that broadcasting on in-house. And so we went from a team of three that could barely, like we were forced to hire outside producers come in. We're like, we really want to scale this. How can we make this in-house competency? And so that's been a huge growth engine for us as a sport. And I think we're all the notes that we get back from whether it's NBC or other people who are broadcasting experts, we pass with really high marks. We still think there's room for improvement, like introducing slow-mo technology, all the data integration that we can do. So that's coming. But we pass really high marks. Officiating, we've made huge strides, and I believe, by integrating technology, will become one of the leading sports. Maybe we're a little bit behind right now, but I think with the AI technology that we're already using is going to put us at probably, one of the innovations in sports. And then gender parity, the men's and women's tour merged in 2015, and we have been leading with equality in prize money since 2012. So while that is sort of, you could say, hey, that's a little bit late by comparison to other sports or other stuff. I think there's still other sports who haven't quite achieved that, and so we're very proud of that, and we try and make in terms of presenting both the men's and women's equally, and also in the representation of the prize money.
In gathering what you're saying, there clearly is a uniqueness to the broadcast formula, and cool to see how much you guys are ahead of the curve and understanding how technology can be used as an aid to the broadcasting experience. A lot of people who watch these conversations I have are people who work in sports television, but they have never done a broadcast in squash.
Yeah, yeah.
Separates squash from other sports in the way you want to get the product across.
It's a good question. I think we've had to really, for better or worse, had to go it alone because no one was paying attention to us. And so we kept trying to shop it around. Like, would you take our sport? Would you take our sport? And we decided in 2011 to take control of our own destiny. And so now streaming direct to customers, OTT direct to customers is like a given, right? Everyone's doing it. Back then in 2011, no one was. And so we really try to take control of our destiny there, trying to fulfill squash fans or existing squash fans who didn't have access to this, and creating year-round programming. Um, and then we're able to try and tap that into broadcasters globally. And I got to preface, like, I know the 101s of broadcast, but what I've learned is like there's way better people who make this their profession. So I'm still learning in that regard, but I can speak just at a high level to it, you know. So I don't want to be over my skis here, but just to give an example, year one for broadcasters to even consider taking us on, we had to deliver almost 300 glass court events per year, and we were struggling to make 150, right? So that really upped our game, and now we've surpassed the 1,000 glass matches per year, and we're on track to be on 2,000 in the next year, if not 2 years. So and that just feeds the machine. People who really get into the sport want more content, want more information, track the stories, track the players, as well as, obviously gambling as a way from a revenue perspective to try and get that in.
There's obviously the gambling component. What can other racket sports learn from squash about what you just said, controlling its own destiny and realizing that you as an organization, the power brokers that be in squash, had to take the initiative and be self-reliant to then see, okay, people really are understanding what the product is about.
Yeah, I think it's the classic incumbent versus newcomer, and in the tech world, like, well, and we have to be more agile, move a little bit faster, and realize we didn't have the budgets internally to really afford a lot of this. So how do you learn how to do it in-house? How do you get really good at it, and continue to add on to that team? So I think that's something that now puts us from a broadcast perspective is, I think of whether it's Padel or some of the other lower tours that, in other racket sports that really, hey, we keep paying these other people to do it because we don't have it, and we can really help share our expertise, share our product in that regard. And we are still continuing to improve it, right? When we a big focus of ours is how do we embrace technology to push the business forward, and we have really partnered fairly successfully with all of our other ecosystem partners. So whether it's Squash Skills, Squash Levels from a ratings and ranking perspective, and really bring this ecosystem together, we are still mindful of, like, we want to partner with bigger technology companies to really accelerate that. And we are trying to create the technology that you could swap out, not just squash specific, but hey, insert other sports like whether it's court tennis if you wanted to, or padel or pickleball. You could do that if you wanted to, and we're trying to bring those product suite together.
How on board are your world-class athletes into embracing this technology that seems to be inevitable moving forward for squash and the way that it's consumed from a broadcast standpoint?
I think the adoption has been really well received. I think there. I'm always going to look towards there's ways we can make it better, right? But I also want to give credit to where we're at right now, and this is for our sport. If you're on Squash TV, this is the big show, right? So within our sport, you know, um, uh, the production just keeps getting better and better. We keep adding more commentators, more data, more directors, more editors. So it really just keeps ramping up the level and quality. What we're trying to do is how do we then push that downstream? So we have the top tier events, and then we've got the gold, silver, bronze, and how do we make sure that they all get the attention? And then we have the Challenger Tour and the Copper Tour, And then there's a lot other more events that still don't even get single cam coverage. And that's something that we've developed a piece of technology that is um, using standard off-the-shelf equipment, but we have a great founder of squashtv.local that then is a single camera broadcast quality. If we put this in your club, this is how we normally broadcast a lot of the lower events, and then we can do remote production, remote scoring integration, and it really just increases the coverage of those lower tier events, but at a really high quality.
The high quality that squash is seeing now, from its performance and its athletes to the broadcasts and to the innovation that is being seen technology-wise in broadcast, all would have to play a part in the negotiating table when squash was hoping to gain entrance into the Olympics in 2028. What do you feel like was the turning point this time around? Assuming some of the things that you mentioned are a part of it, that finally said to the committee, yes, welcome in squash 2028. You will be making your debut.
Yeah, it's I don't think there's any one single factor. I think it's a confluence of factors. And I feel like for 2012, 2016, and 2020, the goalpost, they kind of laid out these goalposts and then the goalposts shifted. So we were trying to meet those standards and suddenly these standards shift. And what I mean by that is sports is now big business. And if you remember, rewind the clock to the 70s, 80s, even some of the 90s, the amateur status versus going to the Olympics versus professional, that used to be a debate. Oh, and in America, some countries took pride, like we're not sending professionals, right? So this is now that's no longer debated. It's how well are they resourced? What's the compensation level? So yeah, and we missed out most notably in 2016 to rugby and golf. And by comparison to rugby and golf, where does squash stack up, right? So I'm well aware of the economics behind it just being a driver, and I think that that makes sense. Um, but where I think we have been able to catch up is two parts. The IOC also as a business expanding, like, hey, um, if we just have 26 or 28 sports in there, we might be missing out. How do we maybe we can increase the number of sports that are in there while maintaining that ceiling of 10,500 athletes. Let's increase the number of sports here. More people will tune in, right? So they're just as mindful of like, let's be relevant. Make sure that as a the Olympics that we're relevant to the TV audience. Let's expand that. And when you look at the criteria, we match up really well. Like we can. One of the unique values that squash offers is we're a small footprint from a venue perspective. So instead of needing to build a whole grass field for, let's say, lacrosse or track and field, we can we're small footprint and we can go anywhere. So do you want to be highlighting this downtown city, by the Eiffel Tower, by Big Ben, by you name it, the squash could likely be there, and so I think that's a huge asset. Number of athletes, this sort of hit us kind of hard that we were initially let in LA 28 around 32 athletes per gender. Now it's cut down to 16, but we're still going to get really strong geographical representation with that, and it's really sort of heartbreaking to the athletes who have been trying so hard that they might have been a contender. Now that's kind of the chances really and literally cut in half. But you get really strong geographical representation. All six continents are represented. Really healthy spread here. Gender parity, I think that's, like I said earlier, that's another really healthy. So when you start expanding the aperture and you look how the inclusion of squash, how sort of cost effective in so many ways it could be there while having high impact, I think that's where it really was made the case to them. And I think there's another confluence of like, there's a big signal that with Mark Walter being involved with the professional squash tour, who's emerging, if not already one of the leading people in sports business associated with the tour. Like I think that's a really strong signal that there's social proof here, that there's, if he believes in it, why let's take another look. So I think that's a factor. I don't want to say any one of these alone is a determiner, but the whole confluence coming together really contributed towards now being the time.
When the time comes for 2028 and the Olympics in squash, let's say the events, the games have ended. What will signal to you then? What are what's the checklist as to say squash made the very most of this opportunity? What has to happen for you to think that?
Um, it's a good question. It certainly keeps me up. I want to also, and this is something we're working on, not just as the tour, but as a sport. And really, I'm sure you're familiar with this. There's so many different, whether it's the different governing bodies, the federations, there's a lot of parties that need to come together, and this is the opportunity for us to really get on the same page while having a global impact. So the way I kind of think about it is we need to make sure that um, if you think of it as literally as a campaign, like it's voting day, right? And that's the Olympics. People need to be aware of that coming in. So we need to be loud and proud about this ahead of time. And some of the concepts we're kicking about is like, well, let's go where the crowd is, which we haven't done as a sport yet. We usually pop up a venue and say, hey, come here, come here, come here. And that's really hard. Versus how can we, as an example, like and I'm more familiar with the US market. So a lot of my knowledge is US market based. Um, like, let's go where there's a baseball game going on and pop up a squash court. Let's go where a tennis tournament is taking place and show them what squash is. And so there, if you think of the number of eyeballs ahead of time to the Olympics that might be like exposed to it, um, that's something we want to do. A prime example of this is I know even if I'm not attending the tournament champions in New York City, Grand Central Station, I would know when it's going on because all my friend texts me who know I love squash and do this like, did you know there's a court here? I'm like, yes, it's so it's like being where the sport is highly trafficked, highly visible. I think that will really help our efforts going into LA 28. So then people are like, oh, I'll tune in and I'll watch this. And then what the Olympics does so well is getting you invested in the athletes, right? So hearing some of the backdrop of these stories and what it takes to get there, I think that's going to be really compelling. So I think the NBC doing what it does best of really getting telling those stories, I think will get people really interested in the personalities of the sport and what can we do ahead of time to make sure there's more people aware to so when they're skipping through the channels, they're like, I'll watch this and give it a second, right? And then it gets we get high. I think people who see the sport in person, especially, there's just a wow factor. Your brain starts going in questions of like, what is this? How is it played? What's going on? And so there's a high wow factor there that we want to be able to meet the moment.
There has to be a lot of a big wow factor when it comes to the stories and these athletes and their inspirational upbringings in terms of what they went through and sacrificed to be there. Not to put you on the spot, Connor, but is there
Mhm.
any athlete that, and obviously there's a lot of athletes in squash that have very inspirational stories, but one that stands out to you or that you've come across that really underlines the storytelling and the beauty of the sport and where it can take somebody?
Mm-mm. Let's see. Yeah, a lot of the athletes are coming to mind in general. It's hard to pick any one because I'm just such a fan of a lot of them. I will say we with there's Noor El Shabini from Egypt who, at age like 12 and 13 was just making her mark on certainly on the junior tour. Like she was world champion very quickly, but then started encroaching on the professional ranks. And we're watching, the our greatest athlete in real time. Like she is on track to break almost every record, and there's almost what some of her performances remind me of is Michael Jordan,
Wow.
who just at her lowest point when you think she can't play anymore. Like literally, her back is in back spasms, and she's wearing a brace. She goes off in between the games, and is just like cowered over, like struggling to like move. Gets back on, is down, down, takes the game, the whole match to five, come back and wins it. And it's just like that's a true champion there. And I think that when you look at those performances of like, that's what Michael Jordan did, and that's why we keep talking about him, right? So I think she's already eight-time world champion, and she's barely 30. So I think of and what we also have going on in the women's game is just like these top three women who are just so dominant. So we just put out a six-part documentary series about them called The Big Three, following their backgrounds, their history there, and it really, So if you think of it as like Rafael Nadal or Roger Federer and Djokovic, like they had that going on. That's what we got going on in the women's sport. Yes, there's that in the men's for sure, but there's more people vying for it, and kind of the top three wasn't quite as established. But the top three here on the women's side have been dominant, and it's a compelling story. The documentary we released about it was just really well done. We're trying to match that Drive to Survive success that's going on. I think we're doing a great job of capturing and putting it in story format, but we need more eyeballs in order to get out there. So
One way to get more eyeballs, as you referenced earlier, was to put makeshift courts in places around the public to where
yeah,
you're basically saying, hey, check out what we're all about. You put it in a major metropolitan area, and now you're getting a new audience to say, hey, what is this? And then curiosity takes over for folks, and they want to know what this is all about, and then they're able to be educated on things. Where is the most breathtaking place that squash has ever been played, as far as like a backdrop or a place in the world where there's just this beauty, certain natural beauty of maybe there's a historical significance of where you are and where that's been?
yeah. I think a few come to mind. So I'll talk about one that I personally did. One that is just kind of like, and two worldwide that are just recognized to be a huge wow factor and backdrop. And I do also want to, I'm partly saying out loud, so you remind me too, but also just access. So like, there's like these big events that go on, right? And like I said, as part of the reason why I think we were very attractive, or why now with the Olympics was we can put a pop-up venue anywhere. But now we're also trying to explore outdoor courts. And so there's been a lot of this effort to try and do it over the years. But right now in Chicago, where I lived for a while, they have an outdoor court in Grant Park, um, where anyone you could walk up there right now and play. Right. So that's a big deal. That if you think of tennis or golf, where which had their roots in private club history, but they really got to explode as it became more accessible to the public, and that's a big deal. So we've got a handful of those. We need more of that, which I think would help with if you really like the sport and you want to try it, uh, you know, more available, low cost barrier to entry, right? So that's sort of the access part of the sport that we really want to tackle. But going to the most breathtaking, I mean, it's hard to beat the pyramids of Egypt,
Jeez, wow.
is especially for our sport right now, where Egypt is just so dominant, and the pyramids are just iconic throughout the world. Like everyone kind of knows what that is. So it's just a really good marrying of the two of our sports narrative, as well as like capturing the attention of other people. Um, and then Grand Central Station. It's hard to beat that as like the hustle and bustle, and it's also the front wall, which is where you strike the ball against. That is completely anyone walking by can watch that. So you could literally stand there and watch the best players in the world for free. And so that gives a real that you just see people standing there for for sure a couple minutes when they're trying to catch their train, and some people keep coming back all week. So I would say those two from a wow factor, and we've done other really great stuff. The one that I did personally was on Michigan Avenue in Chicago. We ran the U.S. Open there, and that was just a cool moment, and really sort of gave me this confidence in the sport of just if you put it out there in front of people, there's a significant wow factor, and people just stand there and watch. And I think it's in part the architecture combined with the athleticism, and you see the speed, right? Um, that's what people stay around for, and the personalities. They're kind of expressive of like interacting with the crowd and with the referees. So it's a pretty good show.
For those who aren't familiar with the sport as much as those like yourself, what can be underrated or overlooked about just the athleticism from these athletes and like how conditioned they are and what they have to put their bodies through to play at such an elite status?
Yeah. So I'll use some different sports for comparison, so it can hopefully try and, if people haven't heard of it, give something to relate to. I think all sports at their highest level just have fantastic athletes, right? So I'll just highlight some of the attributes that isn't well known. So let's use tennis as a head to head. Like the power and the speed and the racket ability, I think there could be matched head to head. The difference between what a squash player needs to do is they need to stop before hitting a wall. Because and every time, I tell new players coming in is like the wall will win every time. So you need to make sure that you don't go running into that wall. So if you think of a tennis player who can really is so fast that they can hit the ball, overrun it, and then turn back around versus needing to stop on a dime. So that is a learned skill that in other sports you don't have to learn that as much, right? So you can overcompensate just being faster and zipping back and forth in tennis. I think Federer, I would point towards, look at his ability to, when he's running to hit a ball, how quickly he stops and then goes back to the center of the court. And that's because, I want to say it's just because of squash and because he was a squash player and you hear him talk about that. But I
Ah,
think that was a contributing factor of learning how to move properly on court. So I think efficiency of movement on court is really well done. And that we also see as we're starting to see Padel sort of really come up, and you see squash players going with that, we have an advantage of like, oh, we understand how the ball comes off the back wall. Like that is just ingrained in us. And we also know how to move on court so we don't hit the walls there. So if you were to take tennis players and squash players going into that sport, you would see those kind of unique differences really coming to bear. Um,
there have to be certain skill sets of pro tennis players that you alluded to Federer that are better suited to transition better to squash. Is how much is the movement, but what other qualities can say another racket sport professional need that isn't easily transferable to squash, or what tactics and qualities are very translatable on top of the movement and like if we throw out the big three as you're referencing in tennis, obviously Federer would be with his experience in squash
yeah.
be right there, but like how easy is it for you knowing this game of squash so well to look at, just turn on any pro tennis match and say, okay, that guy or that gal, it might be easier than somebody else to become
Yeah.
really good at squash.
It's a good question. I'll speak more from when I used to coach, right? Because I think when you get to the top level athletes, like one thing that really separates them is just I think the commonality of sports and or business, but let's use sports, is the mindset, right? Who is really a lot of the physicality is like the things are close to equal. Um, but the mentality is that's what we can't see. We can see the results and who wins when they're down, which Sherbini certainly distinguishes herself. So um, I think so. That's a way to couch like the top athletes. That's harder for me to sort of speak to with authority. But I'll tell you, as more the amateur and what I saw with people who love tennis and play that, who really did well. And what did well, the serve and volleyers from tennis coming into to squash did a great job because you want to be hunting that volley. You don't want the ball to drop. So there's the center of the court, which we'll call the tee for obvious reasons. It's kind of like where the lines intersect, and we just call that. If you control the center, you control the game. And so those tennis players who are really used to hunting the volley will just excel on a squash court, right? Um, And one of the things I would see tennis players really do so execute so well is just target practicing, right? On a tennis court, you're used to like set up those, four balls or hit these cones, and they would just they're laser focused on hitting those targets. So those two key attributes is what I saw, and also just this competitive wanting to crush your opponent. So like those three, I saw them quickly transition into squash and like because where it would be the biggest challenge is letting the ball go by them,
Mm.
right? So that's something you do want to learn is, oh, I have the back wall. So if someone hits it too hard, let me just let the ball kind of lose its speed, come off the back wall, and then I can hit it. So that is really the way I would describe this is there's both things you need to learn in the sport, and there's elements you need to unlearn from tennis in order to transition to being successful. So it's a learning process as well as an unlearning process.
What about the hardest servers, the biggest servers in tennis? And they might not be
Yeah.
the most mobile, but the power that they have over somebody else, what gets in the way or what doesn't get in the way and what that would be like for them?
Yeah, tennis, the serve, it plays such an important and crucial role that really just doesn't in squash. It just and so that's part of the unlearning. Like, look, put the ball in play and make it so they can't hurt you. But otherwise, to ace someone in squash is just it doesn't happen. Like at the amateur levels, it will happen a little bit more frequently because the skill competency hasn't been developed as much. But as you get up, it just doesn't happen. You can make yourself vulnerable to an easy attack immediately and put you immediately either on the defensive or they hit an outright winner. But the serve is never to win the point, typically. Yeah.
They might be on the defensive, but squash as a whole is on the offensive. Going into 2028, the Olympics, Conor O'Malley, senior advisor working in business development, professional squash tour. An honor to have you. And I really loved where this conversation went. We really learned that, in fact, Connor, you are very good at answering questions, just as done in asking questions. I think you might have proven what you can
No.
do on this side of the microphone. So thanks for the very invigorating conversation.
Well, I appreciate it. And thanks for, I'm a huge Rackets fan myself, and it's just nice to be part of the ecosystem where now squash is distinguishing itself, and I welcome pickleball into the scene. I welcome padel. I welcome all the other sports because I'm a big Rackets fan, but I also think squash deserves to be there. And I will get more nervous about those other sports if you can play padel or pickleball in the Olympics or play at Harvard. Until then, I think squash has a distinguishing factor that we're proud of, and we can't wait for more people to watch the sport, become fans of it, as well as then give it a shot because it's a nice way to spend an afternoon.